Hola amigos, bien o no, saludos desde Medellín. Hoy vamos a hablar con novelas. So, este tipo de libro, una historia, pero no es un libro histórico en este sentido, una novela. ¿Y por qué novelas son poco distintos? Porque ellos pueden ayudarnos para mejorar nuestra lengua y también porque algunas veces tenemos dificultades para entender un, un novela. ¿Por qué? So ese es el tema de hoy. So today I thought I'm going to read a bit of this. But before I read a bit of this, I'm going to talk a little bit about novels and why they're different to other types of books, why they can be good things and useful things to read to help us with our language, and why sometimes they might not necessarily be the easiest choice to pick. So, okay, novels, stories. Rather like this one. So, looks easy to read, only a small book, yeah. And we have lots of things in them. Drama, very good. Different uses of time and expressions of time. And a plot, which can be interesting the way they present that, because sometimes you start at the end of the story and then jump backwards to how that happened and these kind of things. Yeah. So you get expressions of time, place, this kind of thing. Deals with emotions, the whole range. Love, envy, violence, forgiveness, betrayal, all kinds of things. And all the psychology that goes with it. Why people do this, how people respond, types of behaviour. Also, we get examples of dialogue. So depending on the novel, depending on the time period it's set, so if it's a recent one, then the people will speak like we do now. Obviously, if you read something like Dickens, which is written 200 years ago, the people will speak like they did back then. So that can be useful. It can be confusing, because some of the language we used to use in the past, we don't really use now. But if your aim is to try and understand the history, again, can be very useful, because often they talk about the problems of that time. And of course, the really big thing for novels, which we're going to see in a minute, is description. So unlike, let's say, a history book that's trying just to tell you what date this happened, in what order these events took place, a novel might change the way that's presented. It could move the time in terms of when the events happened. You could start at one point, move backwards to see something else. And the one thing you normally get is an awful lot of description of all sorts of things. People, places, all kinds of stuff. Which can be very helpful, because it shows you new ways to express what you're seeing, other than, oh look, there's a red car. There are other ways to describe that kind of thing, and novels give you lots of examples of descriptive writing. But there is potentially a problem, depending on the novel and depending on the author. Some authors like to prove to their readers, almost like a secret code, that they have read an awful lot of other books, and they like to show you in a secret sort of way that they understand other topics from history, from culture, by showing in their description of things very often a use of what we will call symbolic language. So depending on the novel, you might get a case where the author is describing, let's say, a tree and a bird. You think, okay, well, it's a tree and a bird. But if you're one of the readers who understands, if you like, the symbolism or the secret code that the author's sharing with his readers, you will see that the tree really is described in a particular way because it indicates something else. And the bird is a very particular type of bird because that bird symbolically represents some other type of emotion or feeling or sense of something. So rather like children's fairy stories, there can be sort of what you read, but what the novel is really trying to tell you. That's where it can get confusing, because sometimes the description is like, well, okay, what's going on here? So occasionally, sometimes like in cinema where you watch films and if the director's trying to be very clever with what he's showing you, the objects you see are part of the language literally of the scene, and if you don't understand why that object is there and what that object really signifies, you don't get a full understanding of what he's trying to show you. This can be the same in a lot of novels, because if you don't quite understand why that object is that object and not a different one, you might miss some of the symbolism, and then perhaps you might not quite understand why the novel ends up the way it does. That might affect your understanding of the plot, for instance. Okay, so something to be aware of, but that's not to say you can't enjoy novels for different reasons. And generally, if we don't get too hung up on the fact that sometimes they are using a lot of very symbolic language, some descriptions are really quite good. It gives you a nice way of describing things you see, and you get a nice picture in your mind, and that again will help you for other things. And if you're lucky, some types of dialogue in some of these novels, extremely realistic. It's a great way to practice. If I was in a place like that, having that type of conversation, these are phrases people genuinely actually use. So in the same way that we can practice by watching films from a certain place, certain scenes, the dialogue's realistic. If we use similar phrases, it's appropriate for that type of place. So anyway, I'm going to read you a bit of this book. It's called The Cone Gatherers. It was written way back in 1955 by a guy called Robin Jenkins. I came across this book nearly 40 years ago now. I was studying this book for one of my high school leaving exams. It's a good little story. So basically what it's about, it's set in Scotland during World War II, so around the 1940s, and it's about two brothers who are working in a large estate, like a giant farm in the north of Scotland, and their job literally is to gather the seeds or the cones from the trees so they can use them later on to replant the forest, because they're coming to cut down the forest because it's the war and they need the wood. That's really all the story's about. But obviously other things happen. It's not quite as simple as that. There's a lot more drama, a lot of emotions, and at some level, which is why we studied this one as our leaving exam, the author is using actually quite a lot of symbolic language. However, for the first part of the book at least, we don't need to worry about that. This is just a straight description of a view of like a mountain scenery in Scotland. So I'm going to read you this bit because it's a really nice description, and see what you think. Chapter 1. It was a good tree by the sea lock, with many cones and much sunshine. It was homely too, with rests among its topmost branches as comfortable as chairs. For hours the two men had worked in silence there, 100 feet from the earth, closer, it seemed, to the blue sky round which they had watched the sun slip. Misted in the morning, the loch had gone through many shades of blue and now was mauve, like the low hills on its far side. Seals that had been playing tag in and out of the seaweed under the surface had disappeared round the point, like children gone home for tea. A destroyer had steamed seawards with a sailor singing cheerfully. More sudden and swifter than hawks and roaring louder than waterfalls, aeroplanes had shot down from the sky over the wood, whose autumnal colours they seemed to have copied for camouflage. In the silence that had followed, gunshots had cracked far off in the wood. There we go. So that's just the opening paragraph of this little book. I hope you can see the kind of picture of the scene. There we are, we're near the loch and the forest, all the changing colours of the sea and the sky around us. So it's a nice book. If you get a chance, have a look. I've reread this many times over the years and it's worth rereading. I won't spoil the plot of the book by saying more about it. But there we go, that's our idea for today. So bear in mind, novels, yes, very good, will help you, particularly with descriptive words and principally examples of dialogue. But be aware sometimes if you find them confusing, don't quite get what's going on, could well be your author's showing his literary refinement, if you like, because he's read all these books and he knows all about these kind of special symbols he can use. It could be he's using a bit of that, but doesn't mean you can't enjoy at least some part of it. So have a go, don't be put off. Déjame saber en los comentarios, como siempre, si tú tienes una novela favorita. And until next time, from Medellin, it's Cheerio.